have the great privilege of being here today with Lindsay Blair and with Mike Levine. Uh, we've known each other for decades and mostly through the University of Miami, but also working together at different times in the South Florida community for commercial music, jazz, all different kinds of styles and situations. And so I'd like to take a minute or two just to give Lindsay and Mike a chance to talk a little bit about their education in music. And then we hope to talk a little bit about overdubbing with the kind of recording method that we're using to do our albums, and also soloing, and a little bit about the home studios that both Mike and Lindsay have had for quite some time, right? So, Lindsay, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. Like I said, we were together at the University of Miami during the time that you were studying, and especially your undergraduate degree, and then we worked together in some hotels and some other kind of work during those years too. Tell us a little bit about when did you actually get started playing guitar? Did you start on guitar?
Yeah, I've primarily been a guitar player the whole time, and I kind of like all the kids in my neighborhoods they all got a guitar when the Beatles came out. So I really didn't care about music at that point. I just wanted to hang out. So I got a guitar too, and I started going to band practice with these guys. And that's how I started.
Like a garage band kind of thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. Living room band, basement band, or whatever. Anything but a stage band.
Right. And so was that high school mostly? Mostly through high school?
I think I was actually in grade school when that did. And then got into, high school. I started playing in a rock band, and it was like a Jimi Hendrix Cream kind of band.
Did you participate in any of the music programs that they had at the high school, or everything that you did was outside of school with the garage band, so to speak?
Yeah, it was pretty much outside of school.
Okay. Yeah.
Until I got to college. And then in college, I really kind of took music more seriously. I couldn't read a note until I started going to college.
Did you read changes?
Years.
Did you read changes?
A little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. The funny thing, my aunt actually had a big band, and I used to go play in her big band. And her big band was all people like music teachers from the area. And so they would this first time they would throw a piece of music in front of me, I never heard it before, and I got to look at it and get through the thing. So that was my orientation into that.
And that was mostly changes to play, right, on those parts,
yeah.
Right? You didn't start reading notes until you got to the college program? Is that true?
The funny thing about my time at the University of Miami is like I was just kind of struggling to get into some of the ensembles, and I was practicing like 10 hours a day every day. And then the person that actually gave me my first listen and kind of paid attention to what I was doing is you.
For the second band. The second band, yeah.
Yeah, I jumped from no band at all up to the second band, which was a big deal,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and it was a great band too.
We had so many great players in the system that for our different kinds of ensembles was very competitive. So even a band that was listed as being the second band had some incredibly talented people. Many of you, like yourself, have gone on to have tremendous careers, and some nationally and internationally known. So, that was a great experience. So had you had much jazz exposure before you came to the U, or?
Yeah, I listened to jazz a lot. I was really a jazz fan. My thing is I loved Wes Montgomery, I loved George Benson, I liked Kenny Burrell, and I liked I like to listen to horn play. I like Freddie Hubbard. I love Freddie Hubbard's CTI records. Stuff from that era, and then the fusion thing was huge at that point. So I was into that too. So I had a lot in here already. I didn't just start from ground zero and try to learn how to play jazz. I already had the sound in my head. In my head.
Who led you to jazz? Did you have a private teacher before you came to the U?
I took actually when I started playing guitar, I took a couple of guitar lessons, and my teacher fired me. And this is when I first started playing. It's like I wanted to play rock music, and this guy he was very good, but he was like a country guitar player. He sounded like Chet Atkins. So he kept trying to get me to do the stuff that he did, and I just wasn't into it. So
Yeah.
so beyond that, I just kind of like what I learned was actually by hanging with musicians and asking them questions. Like I learned how to play ninth chords and major seventh chords and minor seventh chords and all that kind of stuff from just watching other people play.
Somebody that was
and then show me songs, like songs I learned through songs.
Did they turn you on to some of the records that you then started to listen to at that time? That's who told you about these different players that you connected with.
Yeah. Well, like I kind of backed into the jazz thing accidentally. I remember at the time there was a Life magazine or something that had to cover a story about the Monterey Pop Festival. And there's pictures of all my favorite people, Jimi Hendrix, all these people were there. And then I turned the page and there was a full page of like picture of Charles Lloyd. And I thought, oh, he's like these other guys. So I went and bought a Charles Lloyd record, and it had Jack DeJohnette on it, it had Keith Jarrett and Cecil McBee and Charles Lloyd. So I put that on, and I thought, okay, I don't understand it, but it's got to be cool because it was at the Monterey Festival.
Have the same.
They were actually including the Monterey Jazz Festival in that article. I didn't realize.
That's funny because then Charles Lloyd was one of the first. Was among the very first live jazz players that I saw. I saw him at a mall in Paramus, New Jersey, playing solo, nobody else, just him. And around a crowd of people, all of shaking their head, they couldn't understand anything that he was doing. So that's funny, and I got introduced to him with the same album you're talking about, the Monterey one. So that's interesting. So that's like you said, you kind of fell into the jazz exposure from local guitar players. Where did you grow up? Are you from not from Indiana?
Indianapolis.
Oh, you are from Indianapolis. Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Yes.
Well, that's not a big is that a big contrast to your education and upbringing in music, Mike? Because I knew you not until you were already a fairly accomplished pianist and were studying with our friend Vince Maggio at the time. I think when we first met, you were kind of around the school. I don't remember if you were a student at the time.
Yeah, for me, slightly different. Started out on trumpet in middle school. So I basically played 6 years, 3 years in middle school and then 3 years in high school. I became first trumpet kind of by default. I don't think I deserved it, but I was the senior, and the junior played a little bit better than me, but the band director gave me lead trumpet. I kind of gravitated to piano. There was a piano in one of the rooms in the band room, and I started playing. And I told my parents, I really want to pursue the piano. I kind of just jumped into I could read treble clef pretty well from playing trumpet. Bass clef was a mystery, and it's still a bit of a struggle for me that I have to think about. It. I practiced a lot. I listened a lot. I was turned on. I think one of the first records I bought was, and records we're talking, Les McCann, Eddie Harris. I was gravitated to players that, their rhythmic approach, their time feel that, made me tap my foot, let's say, so to speak. And so after probably a year or so with Vince, I went off to college, which I went to Vanderbilt in Nashville,
Oh,
Tennessee,
okay.
which nothing to do with music. Even though I took some classical piano there through
Okay.
another school. Long story short, only to realize that I had no business being there. It wasn't that type of academic was not for me. And I guess I got to the point where I played well enough that I was able to get into the University of Miami.
Oh, okay.
And yes, I developed enough, a lot of transcribing, Wynton Kelly, Hank Mobley, Lee Morgan. I mean, all a little bit of Herbie, some of Chick, a little bit of everything.
Excuse me, Mike,
But I will say, I'll back up a little.
No, I just wanted to ask you one thing because of
Go
what
ahead.
Lindsay had said. So, because you had played the trumpet as an example, and so notes were not
Yes,
a problem for you, where that
correct.
as a guitarist, if my whole view of the music was either by ear or through chord changes, I could see I'd be intimidated. The process of transcribing something that were notes, I would think would
Oh,
be
I got you.
very, very intimidating. But you didn't have that struggle because you had started on the trumpet.
So I did a couple years at the U. I did not graduate. Studied, with Vince.
Uh-huh.
Then I was able to basically start gigging, salsa gig. I lived in the Bahamas for a while.
Hmm.
And one thing that Lindsay had touched on, and even the other guys in the other video, is the camaraderie and just hanging out with other players at the University of Miami. It was like a melting pot. Then jumped into what you'd call a professional career, playing in a lot of different groups.
You had your own bands, right? From trio to your thing with Billy Ross, and then one of the things that you guys both share is the versatility of styles, the ability to either produce, compose, arrange, and play in so many different styles, and with so many different bands, including your own bands of fusion, straight ahead, all different kinds of things. So you have a wide assortment of skills, and at the same time, you might have a wide assortment of influences. So a lot of your more recent productions, Mike, have been on the smooth jazz side that are your own productions, right? Which we'll touch on again too when we talk about home studios. So would you say that was just a result of playing, let's say, in other people's bands, or was that from that you picked that up from records? What led you to get so versatile? Just the demand to be a professional player and have to make a living?
Getting a chance to play. I mean, back then, as you know, Dan and Lindsay as well, you could have a 5-night-a-week gig.
Yeah.
In the same place.
Yep.
Yes. A great era, right, Lindsay, where we had regular playing, whether it was in a hotel working a show or as a band that you were playing with. Go ahead, Lindsay. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
I was going to say, I think just the environment we live in South Florida, Miami area, it's diverse amount of musical influences. Like in Indianapolis, I wouldn't have run across the salsa band.
Mm-hmm.
Although I even listened to this stuff. I had some Mongo Santa Maria records, and I liked this stuff. I didn't even know I thought it was funk. I didn't know it was Latin music.
Yeah.
But like Mike, he's got that thing because he just grew up here, and that's been part of the culture here. So I think that's one thing that's unique about the record is we got that, a lot of South Florida players that have that ability to cross genres like that.
I'd like to segue, if we can, then over to the way that we have our last two albums, especially, and even part of the second album. Lindsay, you joined us on Cartoon Bebop, right, on our third and now our fourth album. And Mike kind of came in from an engineering standpoint, kind of saved our our second recording. We had had a fiasco working with a particular studio in the area. And so we brought about, I don't know, less than half, I think, of the recording. I brought it to Mike to see if we could kind of re-engineer it. And then we started this process that was, some of the recording was done at Mike's home studio in Miami, all in an overdubbing process. And then I think we even did some of the solos, like Ed Callier solos, maybe he recorded at home. So that was a mix. And then we got together, Mike and I, to plan the third album. And then right as we had kind of figured out, I'd figured out how I could possibly budget it and how we were going to try to record at Mike's studio in Miami, in his house, which we'll talk about again in a minute. And we were going to get the rhythm section together and record that, and then maybe a couple of horns, and then the pandemic hit, just like that. And our plans kind of just went right out the window. And then Mike and his wife Carmen, they made a move during the pandemic. Said, listen, we need to get out of Miami. So plus, even if he had stayed there, we couldn't really do recording with masks on our faces and all kinds of other problems that we were worried about. So we then had to change personnel and go with people who had recording studios in their homes. And so for those that maybe are not familiar with our system, so I would write a score, create a score on Sibelius software that has emulations of the different instruments. Then Mike and I would communicate about which tracks to lay down first. So I would leave out the drum parts, and often, right, Mike, we would start with the drums playing with the emulation. And then Mike would somehow put that together, and then we would go to the bass, or sometimes Mike would lay down the keyboard parts. And then once we felt we had kind of a basis of it, depending on whether we needed comping or solos, maybe we would go then to Lindsay, right? And maybe we would do the part of the guitar parts, or we'd wait for Lindsay's part until we had some of the horn parts on, because he had some written lines and things to play. So that was our method. So if I could start with you, Lindsay, I wanted to ask what it's like, because I don't know. I mean, you can write anything on computer software and the computer can play it. But if I'm not a guitarist, there are technical challenges. I might write something and then you would come back and say, look, that's not something you can do on guitar, as an example. Okay. So what's it like to be asked to do comping when there's no solos there yet, and sometimes you would get the recordings and maybe all the horn parts were completed with the backgrounds, and sometimes not. Sometimes Mike's part wasn't done yet, and it was just like a pad, from the software. What's that like, trying to make a decision on what guitar to use, and then what do you do to figure out what kind of comping you want to do? What's that like?
Well, actually, like your arrangements that you wrote, a lot of times you're using the guitar like it's a horn. I'm doing a lot of things where I'm doubling horns and melodies and background lines and stuff. So there's the bulk of what I played on the records. Both of them was I was kind of mixing in with the horn section more than I was trying to be a rhythm section player. But when I would hear a section that that needs a groove, there was the Herbie Hancock tune. Was it Driftin'?
Yeah, on Country Bebop, Driftin'.
Yeah. I listened to that one. I said, man, that needs like Freddie Green. That just needs it, So I didn't even have the changes written down. So I just kind of played the tune by ear, and then Mike sent me a chart, and I'd gotten a couple of the chords wrong. So
this part, probably, yeah. And
but I just the tune to me just tells me what to do. That's in a rhythm section player, that's kind of what you do, especially guitarists. Not only what we are given is chord symbols, and it's up to you to make music out of that thing. So when I do that, I'm always listening for the phrasing of the melody. I'm listening for what the bass line does. I'm listening for what the drummer does, particularly with his hi-hat.
Mm-hmm.
So I see the rhythm section is like the bass player is the kick drum. You know, there's the driving force is just the backbeat or snare. This is just a generalization of all kinds of music, not jazz. And then the hi-hat, that's kind of where the guitar is, you know, like you're kind of in the same little frequency if you're playing like a rhythm guitar part, is that hi-hat. So I need to lock in with that thing. Or the cymbal, it might be the ride cymbal. So, and arrangement wise, I just try to feel out what the tune is, you know, what kind of a feel is the tune, and where do I need to put something in where I'm not cluttering things up.
What about matching a guitar to, let's say that sends you something and you're playing with woodwinds as an example. Does that influence the line, which guitar you use, or what sound setting that you use when you're recording?
A lot of this stuff was kind of jazzy, so that's going to be like an arch top, you know, kind of sound, and I'm going to go with that. And it's just very straight ahead. You don't have to do a whole lot to it. But your charts in particular, like you're very to the articulation of the line, and especially the cutoff of the note, which guitar players generally, when they play with a horn section, they're doubling all that kind of stuff. They don't sound like they're part of the horn section. They sound like something is playing with it, the same lines, but maybe not like the cutoffs being exactly the same. So I had to be very careful to make sure that I read the rests exactly where they are. And I tried to listen to, you know, where the accent was in the like either the Sibelius thing or in the horn section that had, you know, overdubbed. I tried to match their articulation as best as I could,
which is quite challenging for a guitar because of the different kinds of fingerings, and there's just things that you can't do exactly, and that's why, you know, and that's some things that Mike can do as an engineer at times and try to get closer to match that up. And there, as an arranger, not having played guitar, those are the areas where I don't know what my expectations may not be realistic for how those things can match up. Well, Mike, what about you? You usually are among the very first. Sometimes you even lay a sample bass line with your left hand before we even have a bass part recorded. What's it like for you as far as let's start with the comping, you know, and especially for a solo, not just for the ensemble, which I would think is a little more transparent for where you want to, you know, place chords and rhythms. But
yeah, with the ensemble, I would have the because like you said, I was one of the first to go, and sometimes the first, you know, we needed something for a soloist, or we needed a little bit better bass line or more pronounced bass line than Sibelius,
from what's in the Sibelius, for sure.
So, you know, before we passed it off to drums, at least we had you know, gave him a little something. But with the Sibelius, you know, I would listen to it. I would. I'm not going to say I would learn it cold, but I would kind of learn it. I would have it a little bit low in the mix, but I would understand what's going on. And like Lindsay said, you kind of like pick your spots, try not to get in the way, make sure if I heard, you know, sometimes there might be a discrepancy in a voicing. I would have to figure out, okay, wait a second. Oh, yeah, that's the sharp 9 in that one. Or, you know, maybe not all the information was in the piano part, so I would have to notate, you know, a little extra stuff. And then just having that was not too hard to be able to comp around that, because like you said, it's all there.
Ensemble parts,
That that's going to remember. Yeah, the solo. I mean, you just. I guess I'm somewhat known not to overplay and to be somewhat conscientious. So for comping, it would be, I don't want to say generic comping, but light enough where I feel like I'm giving room for a soloist.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to fill every space because there's a temptation. There's like nothing there. So there is a temptation to overplay, which I don't think I would necessarily guilty of.
Is it helpful,
There
Mike?
was one case on one.
I'm sorry. Is it helpful to both of you to be
No.
familiar with who the player is that's playing the solo in the spot that you're comping, and if that you're familiar with the way they play? If they're playing busy, or if they're playing, does that have any influence?
I mean, to me, it's just very hard to react to something that's not there. Right. So you have to, you just have to. Actually, what ends up happening, I think, in this case, is like the soloist ends up playing to you, as opposed to like supporting the soloist.
It's kind of reverse communication, right? Where
yes,
live session, you're trying to listen and respond to. So you find the same thing, Mike, and of course, you're very familiar with Ed Callier's playing. You guys have done an awful lot of stuff together, so maybe comping is easier than someone else.
Would be more on the sparse side, I would say. But there was one or two tunes that I had put down a dummy piano on a keyboard, and I was going to come back and redo, and I think it was on Bud Powell, and I redid it on acoustic. And then when I got to Eddie Mayne's solo, and even Jason's solo, I felt, oh, I have a solo now. The comping I did behind them, because I heard them, was totally different because I was reacting to them and to their vibe. And I think, that was a plus on that particular tune.
So then clearly, so on that one, you were going back and recomping is what you're saying. Therefore, you could do like we would do live, where you're reacting to the phrasing, et cetera, of what's going on. But this is hard for me to imagine, never having been an accompanist, just playing a singular line as a saxophonist or woodwind player. So I'm always, it's a mystery to me, in other words, how that you guys were able to do comping for someone that hasn't even played a solo yet. And then it just seems to fit. Like, honestly, and I've heard other people tell me this, that they could never tell that the way that we do the recording, like that everything is separate, that it just sounds like we're in the same room and that we're playing together. And I believe that's because of the way the rhythm section players, you guys, especially those of you that are doing the comping, the way you put your stuff together. Of course, laying down the drum track is the first thing. That's I'm hoping to get the drummers in this interview series, because to me, that's the biggest mystery.
Nice.
How on earth do they do what they do? And they have almost nothing to work with. So, well, that's very interesting. Would you say it's the same when you're a soloist? Let's say Lindsay, like on David Liebman's tune "Loft Dance," where that was a really complicated challenge that we took on, because here we were trying to put together not only the individual solos of Dave and Joe Davidian that played piano on this, and yourself, Lindsay. We then had the crazy idea in this setting of having three soloists play a couple of choruses together as we took the head out. So that was the first time we've ever done anything like that. And I can only imagine. So when I spoke to David Liebman about it, he said, if I can be last, that would be great, because then I would just punch some stuff in. So I can't remember who was first. I think it was Joe Davidian that played first. And I think when Joe and I talked about it, I said, listen, just play with the idea that sometimes you're going to be in the sun and sometimes you're going to be in the shade. And then I think Lindsay, I think you were next. And but I don't know that you
Yeah.
had Joe solo. Did you have Joe to play with, or did you just it was just like
Yeah, I believe the piano was there. The piano was there already, and his part was. I thought, he played. He filled a lot of spaces in there. So I'm
yeah,
thinking I need to be, in a different range. I need to think of like different rhythms that are more long phrases than his. So I did, kept that in mind, but still, you just got to play what you play when the time comes around. You're just going to be spontaneous. So I
like
hope
a near
I did,
impossible challenge, I thought.
yeah. Now I knew Liebman, David Liebman's playing the way he plays. It's going to be very free, and it's going to be, he could go anywhere, but he's most likely going to get busy, you
Yeah.
know, and it's going to be great. So I need to make sure that I'm just kind of laying low a bit, but enough that I'm poking my head up above the water so they can see that I'm there. Uh, that's kind
Well,
of the approach I
Dave
took to
was
it.
very
It's
complimentary.
hard to do.
Dave was very complimentary about what you and Joe did in your individual solos as well, and
Uh-huh.
he was remarkably, I thought, sparingly. I'm sorry, approached it in a very sparingly manner. I think he edited himself quite a bit in that section
Hmm.
with with the three of you, and then that presented an interesting challenge to you, Mike, as the engineer, because I kind of laid that in your lap and said, "Listen, we need for you to be able to bring one guy up and one guy back, and do all that, and see if there was going to need to be some editing." I don't know how much that you did, but I'm sure you must have needed to do quite a bit of that, either in the mix or with some editing. What was that like?
Yeah, well, let me say this, Dan. You and I are still friends.
That's a miracle, is that right? Because was this the toughest one,
That
or
hands down the toughest one.
okay? Well, first
Hands
of all,
down. I
just
mean,
rhythmically with the horns, that was a major challenge, just to try to get all of that coordinated.
yeah, they're tricky tune. I mean,
Yeah.
you asked me about it, and Mike, do you want to play on it? And I said, you know what, Dan, you gotta know, you gotta know when to fold.
Yeah.
So, but
You
anyhow,
weren't sure you even wanted to hear it, never mind playing it.
you know what? But at the end of when it was all said and done, I grew to really like. I mean, the tune is kicking ass. It's got some good
Yeah.
energy. And
Hmm.
but the communal solo did take a little bit of trying to figure out, like Lindsay said, who's going to be at water and who's going to sink down and you know. But yeah, I'm gonna just throw this in. I know we talked about this a minute ago, but another thing about the comping thing
Yeah.
is, in terms of editing, for me personally, I'm not afraid. After I hear a solo and I hear my comping, and let's say I didn't redo it like I did on Bud Powell, I'm not afraid to. I would have never played that. I would have never comped there while he's doing this. So if I could find a way to, to edit it out, I
Yeah.
would, because you know what I mean. So you have to kind of have that mindset that it's, especially the way we did it, be open to a little bit of editing here and there, just to let the thing breathe.
Well, listen, that's not exclusive to this new era of recording style. I mean, back in the day, even in the early '70s, when I first started to get exposed to do studio work, they did a lot of editing. I mean, it was chop chop, and the stuff was
Okay.
on the floor. But or let's erase that and then come back to that section and overdub and fix it. So. Even though we're approaching this thing, I think, in a way that's probably, especially for smaller ensembles, has been going on. And I think is a direction that the music needs to go in, just because of how expensive. You can't really afford to fly people in and, from all over the place. So if you're not going to be a local or a regional ensemble, I don't know how you record in a way that is affordable given the circumstance
Mhm.
with the so-called music business, what's left, what's left of it. So, I mean, I relied on you. I mean, look, I'm not shy to say that I'm not sure we ever could have done the last two recordings. I couldn't have done it. I know I couldn't have done it if you weren't partnering up with me to put this thing together, because getting all these separate tracks from studios with different microphones done in the home, different players,
Mhm.
all the sounds being different, and try to put those all together. And in some cases, having to edit, and because they don't play together, there's even a pitch problem here and there that had to be solved or edited out, or whatever, and to come up with a product that sounds, I think, as good as this album sounds, and so did Cartoon Bebop. To me, is just, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, I know you. I know the amount of time and work that you put in from the editing and mixing standpoint, not even counting, your contribution as an artist and a composer. So on this album, your the only original material was your three compositions, right? Carmencita and help me out here, Mike. Uh,
Part of me,
Jocko,
Part of Me, yeah. And what was the third one? Jocko.
Jocko, right?
Jocko.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And you had, except for Part of Me, Carmencita and Jocko, you had already had recorded tracks. Had you actually produced them, and had they been issued on other albums already, or were they just kind of in the can at the time?
No, Carmencita was on my very first project, and Jocko was on my second or third, uh, third project.
Were
Yes,
those
and
considered to
part of
be,
me was. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, were they in the so-called
Say what,
smooth,
Dan?
were they in the smooth jazz category, or were they more of a straight ahead albums?
They were, well. That's the interesting thing. They were on what was considered kind of a smooth jazz recording, but Carmencita is really not smooth jazz, and Jocko, same. I wouldn't expect. I know what they play on those stations, and those two tunes would not be played. Maybe Jocko, maybe. But
So now we just
and
overlaid some horn parts to those that fit our ensemble instrumentation, right?
on
That's
Jocko.
right, because yeah, on those two tunes you sent me what you already recorded. I think in one or two cases we edited those tracks. I'm trying to remember back, and then I think I did some Sibelius on it to send to you with, to get your approval and feedback, and then we gradually recorded the horn parts. Isn't that's my recollection?
Well, actually, Carmencita was all re-recorded. We used the same. Oddly enough, we used the same rhythm section that was originally used. We used Lee Levin on drums, and Nicky Orta and Richard Bravo, and then Lindsay wasn't on the original recording because I just did it without guitar. But Lindsay was added into the version of Carmencita, and but Jocko was the original. Me and Lee and Will Lee
Yeah.
and Lindsay, some of the original tracks and some extra tracks that he sent.
And so that
Combo.
was really
Yeah.
something different, because that was different than all of the other tunes. Like we didn't have any of that kind of material with the other tunes that we recorded, and we started from scratch with Part of Me, right? And that was
That's
original.
correct.
Tell me again. Originally, you had done an arrangement for a singer that you were working with, and you kind of
Right.
reharmonized All of Me for that singer, right? And then
Right.
you presented me with an instrumental version of it, and then you and I talked about, well, what about an original melody? Is that how that?
Yeah. That's exactly how that happened. It was actually you had mentioned it and said, "Hey, Mike, why don't you do this?" And I said, I didn't think of that. And so it's, what kind of a convoluted, all of me, kind of spun around a bit. And yeah, it seemed to work out pretty well.
Yeah, I mean it's not that you can really tell too much, but because we only get reports from one or two of the apps, from the companies like Spotify and Apple Music, and their audiences are very different. It's really funny which ones that they seem to hone in on. I was very surprised to see that. And so on Spotify, um, uh, all three of your compositions seem to have the same impact, although for a while, part of me, it seemed to lead the group. Now, over on, it was different over on the other app. I mean, so, and as far as radio is concerned, which, it was great to see that we moved all the way up to number 7 last week on the Jazz Week chart. We sort of, I felt like each week we stumbled up, like, we moved up a few. So much different than our other albums where they jumped like 30 points or something like that, where this was like, 10 points or 4 points or whatever. So, but it's nice to know that you're getting that kind of support from the radio industry and that they're playing it. But I don't know which tunes they're playing. I'd like to segue then, if we can, and talk a little bit about how you established and maybe changed over the years your home studios. And Lindsay, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. You've had your studio for many years at home?
Well, I don't do near as much recording as, like, say, Mike does. But yeah, I kind of started home studio stuff way back in the 80s with the 8-track thing, which would, we would, I don't think it was SMPTE, but it was some sort of MIDI code that we could like get a sequencer to play in time with the track. And then everybody went to ADATs. I didn't do the ADAT era. I got back into having like a home studio, gosh, in the 90s, I think, 1990s. And it was on a Mac before I was using a PC. First time I ever used a computer was that. And I don't remember what I was using to record with, but I changed, kept evolving, like hardware and software and the hardware and software also kept evolving. So I can't recall everything that I went through, but now I've got the Universal Audio Apollo 8P and I'm just going into my Mac. I use most of the time to record. I have this thing, the Kemper Profiler, which is, it's a really miraculous, it's kind of like turned guitar players into the equivalent of what synthesizers do. Like you can get any keyboard sound that you want out of like a nice Nord. You can get your B3 there, you can get your clavinet, you can get a Rhodes, you can get an acoustic piano. So the Kemper kind of does the same thing for guitar players.
So you record direct?
Direct? I record a lot direct, yes. Okay. Now I use microphones sometimes when I want to get a specific sound from an amp.
Did you do your Wes Montgomery album? Did you do most of that out of your own studio?
No, we did that over at Mike's place, and that was live primarily. Okay. Really, we just tracked everything, all the solos, the heads. It's pretty much a live album.
So now, are you doing Lindsay? Are you doing some recording at home for other artists now? So you don't have to go into the studio. You record it, overdub or whatever you're going to do, and email it to client, or is that only really predominantly for us? Yeah. Okay.
I do some stuff live too. There's this producer named Charlie Colello that he brings in a whole rhythm section. We do the whole thing live, and I go to Power Station Studios over here to do most of that stuff. But I do a lot of stuff that not that I do a whole lot of stuff, but I do most stuff here at my house.
I mean, do you enjoy being able to do that kind of recording at home where you can feel like you can perfect it before you send it to somebody? I mean, is that something you enjoy, or do you prefer to go to a studio where you're going to play live with the rhythm section?
I really like going to a rhythm live sessions. I really do. But
I
playing at home is cool because it's very convenient and I can do it at my own time frame. And I try not to be too picky when I mean, Mike is like really a perfectionist.
Yes.
I'm the more player. Like I like to have just a good flow and have it feel good. And if there might be a little thing in there that might be an imperfection, but to me, those things make it sound human. And
Yeah.
I like that. So
Yeah. So if it has a little hair on it, that's cool. And then it's the camaraderie and the interaction. I mean, there's no substitute for being able to do music live. That's the intent. It's just the reality of what it means to produce anything anymore. Unless you're doing it just for a tax write-off, you have no expectation that it's gonna pay for itself. So given those parameters has a big effect, and the larger the group, the more people to pay, et cetera. So, Mike, give us an overview of what your Miami studio used to be like when you did recording there.
Well, let me say this first, Dan. Having the studio at home, I did stay married. I am still currently married to Carl.
Which is a miracle in itself. Okay.
Yes, because of the layout. I had a Yamaha C7 in the master bedroom.
Okay.
So, but to get to the studio, you have to go through the master bedroom, then you go through the bathroom, which leads you to a utility room, which most of the time was the drums, and maybe, like Lindsay said, if he was going direct, maybe drums and a direct instrument. And then another room where I could put another person, and then the control room. So it was, and there have been times when I've done some trio recording for a singer where, an engineer was hired. Engineers have come to work at Downtime Studio. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. That way I could and it's actually good that way because when you're dealing with multiple people and playing yourself and having maybe written the arrangement, it's almost like, do I have to worry about now what's being recorded? It gets to be a little ponderous.
Yeah, and then if you had a couple of horns to overdub, you would squeeze them in kind of the same way, right?
Yeah, I mean, if they came to overdub, I mean, Dan, I did the full big band there.
Wow.
Which was, like you had alluded to it earlier.
You mean all the horns? You did all the horns at the same time? No.
No,
Okay.
we did rhythm section and 2 key horns, just so the drummer could get a feel for, when he was crashing into hits.
Kicks, yeah.
And then we came back with the full sax section. They did theirs, then came back with the full trumpets and the full bone section. And
you're frustrated
you
over
would
the
never
lack
know.
of separation when you had let's say all the woodwinds or saxophones in the same room?
Not really, because it goes back to kind of what we've been talking about. I mean, if the money was there and the time was there and you got the good players and everybody rehearsed, and I remember hearing the woodwinds talk about, we're going to cut off here, we're going to breathe here, we're going to crescendo here,
Rehearsal, yeah.
and then you got guys like heavyweight players that they hear something go wrong. It's like, wait a second, we have to do that again.
Now you reestablished a new studio. And so what is that like?
Yes.
By comparison?
The studio in North Florida is one big treated room with my grand piano. And so it's a little different now for me. Recording the piano is, I think I've got it down even better there. The room sounds better. I've got the mics dialed in and the mic preamps. But for doing like a live, like let's say if I were to do something, if Lindsay and I were to do another recording together like we did before, we'd all be in the same room. It'd be a different animal. It could be done, but now, it's probably, not going to be done. I mean, I've had some guys come in to record congas and percussion and some vocals, but now it's just kind of one at a time, unless you want to say, hey, let's go for a live trio, let's go for a live quartet, and what we get is what we get.
Lindsay, you did mention some of the equipment that you use. What are the mics? If you're going to use an amp, what microphones, what are they that you use? Do you remember or have them?
Yeah, if I'm going to mic a guitar amp, I would use either a SM57, Shure SM57, Sennheiser E609, or
What's the amp?
Royer.
I'm sorry, what was the
I
amp?
have a lot of amps. I have a Marshall JTM 45. I got a Fender like a 1962 Fender Tremolux. I got a 1965 Princeton. I've got two 1970s Fender Deluxes. I've got this rack-mounted preamp thing that's an Agnator with a power amp that goes with that. So I have a bunch of amplifiers, and I have like a cabinet in the garage, or some of the amps, like the Princeton amp, has a speaker in the amp, and I just, so that's how I mic the amp.
And a collection of guitars that obviously you have for different purposes, for different sounds, etc.
Oh yeah, I got a lot of kind of all the basic flavors of type of guitars that you might want to hear. I've got pretty much all of them, good ones. And then acoustic guitar, I have this Neumann KM184 that I use mostly. I've also got an AKG 441, is it? 414 or 414? I get those mixed up. 414.
414.
Yeah.
And your recording equipment, you had mentioned that. Let's just mention that again. What is the software that you use for your recording? Are you using Pro Tools or?
I like Logic Pro, and then I have this Apollo, Universal Audio Apollo interface, and that's pretty much it.
You have a board? What is the hardware? No. Okay.
It just runs straight into my computer, and the Apollo. The thing that's good about this is it's got good emulations of all the preamps and compressors, things that you would have as outboard gear in a studio. It's kind of built into that thing, and it's not the real thing, but it's as close as you can get without being the real thing.
Great. Mike, what about you? What, from a software standpoint, you use Pro Tools, right?
Yeah, I'm using Pro Tools. I have an old setup that I'm not willing to part with because I put it right by the piano. It's a Mac Mini, and then it has an Apogee 8-channel converter, and I have right next to that I have what's called a lunchbox, which is a device that basically you plug in these different modules, and I have two Millennia mic preamps. So I go from the KM84, the older version of the 184, KM84, two mics on the piano, into the Millennia, into the Apogee, which converts it, and then into Pro Tools. Oh, wow. That's my setup. That's right by the piano. And even though I could have done things remote and all that, sometimes I'm not as savvy as I need to be. But anyhow, that sits by the piano. But then when I go to mix or edit, I have another computer that runs a different version of Pro Tools, and I've integrated that with a Sony digital console. So this last project, Islands, was mixed through Pro Tools, but I basically use Pro Tools for some EQ, but for the automation of being able to, move things up and down mix wise if somebody got too loud, or so
Yeah.
forth, or muting. And the Sony seemed to add a little bit more dimension, spread this way. It has some great EQ as well, and I didn't have to use Pro Tools to sum all the mix.
Okay.
The Sony was summing, putting it all together, and then I'm mixing back into 2 tracks in Pro Tools. There was a couple issues. Sometimes I could tell that that somebody didn't play everything on the same day.
Okay.
Kind of like they would, you know, maybe work on X amount and then come back the next day and I'll finish it up. And then, you could tell there was sometimes a sonic tone difference, and I could try to do something about that, or there was a level difference.
Okay.
That, oh, he's playing, yeah, which is, not hard stuff to do. You just have to be aware of it.
Well, then the brass
But,
mutes, right?
the-
Some of the brass parts they use mutes. So you'd have a part where there was no mute, and then a part that I guess that brought its own challenges too.
Absolutely. Same, usually level changes that, this part is kind of way too loud compared to, what came before, and maybe a combination of, like you said, if it was all done the same day, then it would just have to be due to the mute itself.
Now this is pre-mixed.
Or they got a little close to them.
These are pre-mixing.
Yes,
channels,
that's all.
right?
That's right. Being able to make it sound like it was all done smoothly in one take, that nothing, and that guys were playing and listening to each other, so that the dynamic was consistent when it needed to be.
Right. The crescendos and all that kind of stuff, to the best of our
Right.
ability. Well, let me finish up by,
Yes.
first of all, making it very clear how appreciative, first of all, I am to both of you and everybody that was involved with the project. How, without the incredible cooperation and that you guys have provided, and not to mention the skills and the musicianship, and then everything that you've developed, the system you've developed, Mike, for us to be able to do a recording like this is just, to me, I'm still amazed. I really am, because the easiest part of this whole thing, I think, at least from a mechanical standpoint, is doing a score. I know for myself, and I don't know if this is very similar to what Lindsay went through planning out his Wes Montgomery tribute album and all the albums and productions that you've done. Mine has just a couple of stages. I probably spent 6 months trying to figure out what music I think will work. With the philosophy we've developed is that people, since they don't buy an album anymore, having diversified styles with the tracks, figuring they might like one thing or they might like 2 things to stream. So first, it's kind of what different styles am I going to look at, and then what hasn't already been over recorded. I mean, there's some masterful arrangements and recording that we've done. Well, I'm not going to, I can't compete with that. So I want to look for some things that maybe haven't been done like that, and try to. So that's a good 6 months. I mean, I spent a lot of, since I'm not full-time in music anymore. We didn't talk about how that has changed over the years. I mean, most of the guys in the band, they have to have some other full-time employment. So they're a part-time person, kind of like I am with music. It's an avocation, where my impression is, Lindsay and you, Mike, that pretty much, everything about what you're doing from a professional standpoint revolves around something with music. So once I've had a chance to pick out tunes, and I usually rely on, I used to send them to Vince, and I send them to you, Mike, and maybe 1 or 2 other people to kind of feel out, like, what do you think of these? So I sent him a sample from Sibelius, which is not a great way to introduce what you want to work on. And then I start doing arranging. Well, the arranging, because I'm part-time doing it, probably takes me almost a year to do. I try to do 14 arrangements, hoping 11 of them would be good enough to do something. Then I usually talk to you, Mike, and I say, well, look, I'm planning out a budget, because during that time I squirrel away some money to pay for this crazy, thing. And then then I see who's willing to, work on do it for us for slave labor. And then we start putting together how we're going to do the record. So it's about 2.5 years, give or take, from one to the next. It seems like not from a working standpoint, but from a clarity standpoint, it seems like the last stage of doing the recordings. I'm not talking about the mixing and the editing, but just now we've picked out the music. We pretty much know what we want. Now the players are starting to record it and send it in, so it's, and now at our point professionally or part-time-ish or whatever everybody's circumstances is, I mean, it's really a labor of love anymore. It's a statement. Here's our guys that almost nobody really even knows who we are, I mean, and we've had unbelievably radio success out of our 4 projects. This one is currently number 7. Our first one went to number 5. And from my standpoint, musically, et cetera, I mean, it's not even the same league as what we've done on this last project. And then the second one went up to number 9. The pandemic Cartoon Bebop went to 13. And now this one went to number 7. So from a radio standpoint, I mean, if that's going to be a barometer for success, I mean, I couldn't really be more happy, about that. So the question is, are we all crazy enough sometime down the road to ever want to do something like this, again? So I think if we have what we consider to be some levels of success and we have a rest, depending on all of our circumstances, maybe we'd be crazy enough to try, to maybe try one more time.